apple cinnamon?
Yeah.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you. How are you? So, there was this guy. He was visiting the cathedral at Notre Dame, and he went in and he went up to the pews and he started praying. And he was in deep, 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 deep prayer. He was an American tourist, there. And in the midst of his deep prayer, you know, on his knees at the cathedral, he suddenly had a direct communication with God, from God to God. And he was just stunned in this rapturous moment. And God said, "Yes, you can ask me some questions." And he said, "How did he know I wanted to ask him some questions?" Well, he's God. He knows these things. So he said, "Okay, God, how long is 1,000,000 years?" "Oh, my son, to me it's only but a minute." And our tourist was just impressed. God is pretty wise, it seems. Yes. He says, "Well, God, how about this? How much is $1,000,000? Oh, to me, $1,000,000 is but a penny." And he thought for a little bit. He says, "God, may I have a penny?" And God said, reaching into his pocket, said, "Okay, just wait a minute." That's the. Okay, never mind. That's the story of my life there. Anyway, lately I've been absorbed in reading a book, this book as a matter of fact. It's called 4,000 Weeks, Time Management for Mortals by Oliver Burkeman. I've been engrossed in this book. I found it as something like, 10 books on philosophy that you must read to change your life or something. I said, "Oh, okay." So anyway, I'd seen that somewhere else, this book somewhere else before, and I went for it. And believe me, it's hardly about time management as we normally think of it. There's no mention of day planners, hardly, and there's no goal-setting exercises or anything like that. It's not about that. But to start with, thinking, why this title, 4,000 Weeks? Why do you think that number is in there? That's generally speaking, the allotted number of weeks we each have to live on average, And you think, wow, just 4,000 weeks, I'd rather think of it as 28,000 days, that's so anyway. And in the book, it talks about, the experience of time, just what is this thing, So do you think before there were clocks and watches and such, how was time experienced for somebody who maybe was a medieval peasant, for instance? What was that, if you asked them about time, what would they say? Well, their time was more or less divided up and governed by tasks that were needed to be done, the seasons themselves, the crops, the sun, from sun setting and rising, that sort of thing. That's what measured time. There were sundials and water clocks and such then too. But if you asked a peasant back then, to give you, like you were visiting this from the future, and you said, "Well, how long is a month or so?" And he was like, probably look at you, "What's a month?" And you said, "I don't know, how long it's." He'd maybe after thinking, he would say, "Well, that's a harvest time. The time is needed in order to gather in all the crops, for after the season is over. And you say, well, how about a short time? How long would it, if you said, I'll see you in just a little bit, what would you say? You would say, a pissing time. The amount of time it takes you to take a leak. So, and that would be, that experience of time for these people. Did you know in South Korea, the 229th national treasure is this structure, this device called the Borugak Jagyongnu, the water clock of Borugak. So this is what was used to standardize time during the Joseon dynasty in South Korea, in the town Borugak, I guess. But this clock was, another term for it was Jagyokuru, which means self-striking clock. And it was an innovation at the time, that there were water clocks before, and water clock is basically just some devices that slowly leaks out water. By the time 24 hours are up, you could see that it had gone. There were lines drawn on the inside of it, and you could see, oh, that's a day has passed, or whatever, 12 hours have passed, or something like that. But this clock was designed such that as the water would raise up in these tall columns, it would trip a lever on top, which would send a ball rolling this way, another ball rolling this way. Then it would hit another lever. It would make this little guy go and strike a gong or strike a bell or a drum or something like that. Or cause this little puppet to flip over a placard, like that. And so that was kind of a digital clock back then, in a way, but the days then was divided into 12 units, and each unit would correspond with one of the figures on the Chinese zodiac. So as that ball went down and made the puppet go, and he flipped over a placard, there'd be a rat on there. So it was rat o'clock. 11 to 1 in the morning was rat o'clock. 1 to 3 was ox o'clock. So it was a cool way of doing things, I thought. Now, so this, you can see, we've had, as human beings, an obsession with time for a while, since time immemorial. Now, the need to know what time it was really came about when groups of people decided, had this requirement to more or less synchronize their activities, right? So we're going to get together at such and such blah time and do this, do things at that time. So, and monasteries were one of the first places to measure time, because monks got up at one time in order to do their prayers in the morning and do their different tasks. And I can't let this one go by, and they used sundials and hourglasses and bells, that would go off at those certain times, So it truly was like sands through the hourglass. So are the days of our lives. Only a few. See, when I was writing this, I thought I was hilarious. So anyway, but Oliver Burkeman, in his book, he wrote something quite profound in my view, at least. That, these are his words. He says, "Why treat 4,000 weeks as a very small number? Because it's so tiny compared with infinity, rather than being treated as a huge number, because it's so many more weeks than you would have received if you had never been born? Surely, only somebody who'd failed to notice how remarkable it is that that anything is in the first place would take their own being as such a given, as if it were something that they had every right to have conferred upon them and never have taken away. So maybe it's not that you've been cheated out of an unlimited supply of time. Maybe it's almost incomprehensibly miraculous that you've been granted any time at all. You know, it's amazing. You know, here we are. You know, why? You know, this is, you know, I've said before, you know, if you're not amazed, you're not paying attention. You know, pay attention. This is an incredible experience just to be. Now, this is sort of a lot of my youth, or part of my youth, I should say. But remember those days when you were young, probably, maybe even hopefully recently too. You have something that engrosses you to this degree. But remember those moments when you were just completely lost in what it was that you were doing, whatever it might have been, right? You were engrossed in it. That word engrossed, it means to be engaged wholly, to have your attention fully occupied with or by. One of the things that I remember that I would be engrossed in, completely absorbed in, is this. You know, in our house, or modest house, where we had all of my uncles living at one time, plus my mom and my dad and everybody. But anyway, it was in La Puente, California. It's a little, you know, suburb of LA in Southern California. And we had a patio out and back, and there was a barbecue made from brick back there, and there were these like tiered walls that came up each side of it. And I would sit on one of the lower walls as a kid, and if I had discovered a ball of string that was entangled, or anything that was tangled up, something that was tangled, I would get totally into untangling it, you know, just following each little piece over this loop, over that loop, and then finally figuring out and just completely absorbing myself in untangling this string until I'd finally, what seemed like to me a long time, you know, I'd have a string, you know, free of knots at all, you know. And after doing that, I would look up, look around. Most likely it was a summer day. Lots of green grass, lots of ice plant on the back hill. That's what was popular back then for landscaping. It made sliding down the hill really easy. But I would look around and just breathe in, and it was total peace. It was samadhi, I tell you. You know, I was totally there, you know. It was complete concentration. And there were other times, you know, playing with friends or whatever, you get engrossed in what you were doing as a group of 2, 3, 4, whatever it was. And you'd look up and get out of what you were doing. All of a sudden you'd realize what you thought had been, you know, just 30 minutes was like 2 hours later or something like that, you know. You'd say, jeepers, because it was the 60s back then, you know, or gee willikers, possibly. So just amazing. So, you know, what is time? What is that experience of time when you're in that engrossment, when you're in that deep absorption? You know, when it feels like hours have gone by, but no more than just a minute or two seems to have gone by. You know, there's a book that I really liked when I was younger too. It was Desert Solitaire by Edward Abbey. He was a sort of a nature writer, a journalist too. But it's his memoir of his time spent in the Glen Canyon desert wilderness before Glen Canyon was filled with water to become Lake Powell, you know, when the Glen Canyon Dam was built. It's in Utah, northern Arizona area. And he writes this about his, what it was like on those days. It's still the desert back then, still. Said, time passed extremely slowly, as time should pass, with the days lingering and long, spacious and free as the summers of childhood. To me, that's it. It always gets me, at work, at other places, the, boy, that morning went fast. That was great. What's so great about that? It's like, it's like, 12 more minutes closer to, so, to me, I relish that idea that things just linger and languish and take time to go by. My wife is not like that. She's got the impatience gene, you know. So talking about this experience of absorption, of doing something that takes all of your mind to be into. In 2015, when teacher Heido Sunim and the late Reverend Bapan, Brian Meisner, the three of us, your wife Kai, we all went and visited Waomsa in South Korea for a week or so. It was part of the time was spent there. But we would get up to be early, to be at services at around 5. I think that's what time it was, but it was in the morning, early in the morning. So we were waking up at this time to commune with others, to be with others. And what I was utterly impressed with the monks was, they got up, there was the wooden fish, the cloud being bonged, all these symbols being struck, and the Dharma bell 108 times, filling up the valley, with sound. And finally, all the monks in their kasas and robes walking to the services, And one thing to notice is they just didn't get up and like, oh, okay, let's go, start walking, as groups of 4 or 5 or whatever. No. They walked really in Dharma seniority, I'm sure, And that's not a hierarchy thing necessarily. It's just, it's the lineage. It's like an experience of the lineage, as you think of like the front of that line, closest to Buddha in a way, So they walked, and they didn't walk in a straight line from where they were to the Dharma hall. They walked a path along the edges of the paved areas. They walked this way. They walk up this corner back here. Finally up the steps. Flippin' amazing to see that many people just walking like that. I wish each of you would have that in your little brains, but it was great. And then to be at the service itself and hear the chanting that they do as a group in unison. To me, it was basically as good as hearing the Gregorian chants, only being there and not hearing a recording. It was just stunning, hearing them all together in unison reciting the sutras. What we were chanting this morning, for instance. So it's these things that we can do that can help bring us into this place too. Singing in a choir. What time is it when you're in the middle of a song singing? I don't know that there's a relevant answer. you know. You're playing in a band together. You're playing a team sport. You know, what time is it when you're in the midst of all these things? So these are times in which we lose ourselves. We get a break from our habitual thought patterns, you know, ego. We get a break from ego telling us this, that, and the other thing. We get a break on operating based on the program that our thought patterns have dictated it to us for so long. You get a chance to be free, you know. So many of us think that freedom is I can do anything whenever I want, you know. You know, I can just lay around and watch TV, you know. I feel like getting in the car and driving, you know, I can do that if I want, you know. I don't have to be anywhere any old time. I can do anything I want, you know. You're being governed by, I can do anything I want, you know. You're, you know, I think there's a Zen story. A monk would tell, you know, had somebody in the audience says, you can't make me do what you want me to. He says, okay, stand up. The guy sits down. Sit down. He stands up. Sit down. And he says, no, I'm just going to stand here. Okay, then stand there. Sits down. You know, he was having him do what he wanted. you know, so, you know, and then there's the idea of, you know, what is the purpose of all this stuff? To be in a choir, to play in a band, to chant, to meditate, to be in sitting meditation, to do walking meditation as those monks were doing, you know. Is the purpose of that meditation, of those monks walking in a line to go up to the Dharma hall to be on their mats and ready for service? Was it to get from point A to point B? You know, point B better than point A? You know? The purpose was to do that walking meditation, you know? When we chant, you know, Jishin Kim Yong Ne, you know, just think of that, to be together. I was trying to be absorbed in that. But then at one point I got lost in the incense up front. You know, was that thing lit or not? You know, and I forgot a little something. But I gathered myself. But anyway, you know, it's not to get to the end of it. You know, Alan Watts said, you know, being in an orchestra and playing a symphony. You know, the purpose isn't to get from the beginning of the symphony to the end of the symphony. Otherwise, you know, the best orchestra would be the fastest one. You know, that's not it. And as we're sitting in meditation, as hard as it is sometimes, the purpose isn't to have the gong go off, you know, and get up and be able to move your legs. You know? So think of that in the future when we're meditating. You know, the purpose of the practice isn't to wait patiently for the bell. You know, the purpose of the chant isn't to recite the words and wait until you're done at the end of it all. You know. So what is that purpose of meditation? To be meditating. You know, the purpose of chanting, to be chanting. You know. The purpose of walking meditation, to be walking. You know. The purpose of life, you know, as big a question as that seems to be for people, maybe it's just to be alive and to be living. You know. You know, what's the purpose of a dog? Woof! Woof! You know. You know, to be one voice, to be to be in the midst of this. What is this? There's a cool quote. I have part of it on my wall in my meditation room, but it's from this book, Zen Graffiti. which I love this thing. That's amazing. It said, try not to live as if time were a reality which can steal away your life. Time is Mara's realm, not the Buddha's. Sit with that. Think of that. Time is Mara's realm, not the Buddha's. You're in this hustle bustle. Mara's got you by the short hairs. Telling you what to do, be here, be there. That's not freedom. The Buddha's realm is beyond time, space. So that's my invitation, to sit with those words. Time is Mara's realm, not the Buddha's. Okay.